Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Beit Midrash. Hope everyone had a good week since last class, is having a good week since Sunday or since Shabbat, um, and everything's going well with y'all. And glad to have you back, and glad to be learning together again today. We're up. We're already up to chapter 3 in this book. I don't know how it happened so fast, but we're already up to chapter 3 in this book. Feels like we just started last week. Um, but want to open it up on sacred. The chapter is called "Sacred Indignation" and on protest. I want to open it up for any opening thoughts, comments, questions before we jump into it. Yes, Lisa.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I listened to the class last week. The rabbi had sort of cued me in on the fact that there was a big discussion about grace, which I had some discomfort with. And the class really helped me just listening to everybody talk about it and respond to what was in the chapter. And it did help me. I mean, it helped me just to get more comfortable and to also realize that maybe the part of grace that I was the most uncomfortable with had to do with sort of like this forgiveness without having to do anything. And that's not what Rabbi Held is talking about in his use of grace.
Correct.
So I think that helped me to distinguish between the different uses of grace. But anyway, I'll just jump into this chapter and just say that there's one thing that I really liked in this chapter. I don't have a page number. Was because I like this in life. The ability to like hold two different things that are like sort of seemingly in opposition to each other, but be able to hold them at the same time and not mix them together. And I think he talks about being able to hold our gratitude and our appreciation for the splendor of the beauty and the splendor and creation and all those things that we are just given, but also being able to hold our anger and our protest at how unfair and how horrible some things are and how oppressive and mistreatment and all the terrible things in the world, and not mix them together and say like, okay, well then the world's a so-so place, because it's like not super great and it's not super bad. It's kind of in the middle, but really not to do that and just to hold like both things. And it reminded me of this rabbi that I listened to, Rabbi Sharon Brous. She is the rabbi at Ikar in Los Angeles, and she does have strong political views, which you may agree with or not agree with. But she does something which I really like, and she holds this deep love of Israel, and nothing gets in the way of that. She deeply, deeply, deeply loves Israel, but she also deeply protested the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and she was able during the war, and I assume still is able to like hold both of these truths at the same time. And that's so that reminded me of this chapter. And so anyway, it's something that I think I can strive for. I can't say I'm always successful at it, but I can strive to be able to like hold both those truths, both those principles inside me at the same time, and not let them get diluted or become docile or whatever. And So anyway, that's just what I really liked.
Anybody else want to chime in? Yes, Diane. You're muted, but
Uh, I had a little trouble in the beginning of the chapter because the word anger was used so much. And we just got out of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where we studied that one who holds on to his anger, the highest goal should be to let go of it, to be slow to anger and to let go of it quickly. And here we're encouraged to to work on developing anger. So I'm glad he moved to indignation because that was really hard for me to read about so much anger. And indignation is a much better term to work with than anger. And I really liked I like the page, the writing in the page in the middle of 58, because there are so many things that we all want to work on that it's really hard um, to say which one you're going to let go of. And he lists, three things, whether it's in your family or your community or the universe. We all are faced with all of these places that need our attention, and picking them and giving them a fair shot of our efforts is a real challenge for me anyway.
Anyone
I have a
else?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Hmm.
Okay. Um, Picking up with what was just said, I found it really interesting and thought-provoking. Um, the statement of if there's something wrong in your family and you see it, then you're called upon to not to ignore it, but to do something about it. The same thing with your community, with your nation. And then there's a statement that follows closely, I think, of there's there's no such thing as being an innocent bystander,
Yeah.
which that's really interesting, and it's really for me that's really hard because to decide when something is your fight and when it's not, when to decide when to stay in your lane and when to butt in, that's really difficult. um and I can think of situations in my life where I was a bystander, and in my gut I was feeling like I should say something or do something, but I didn't. i, I don't know if that's certainly people have different responses, and we're brought up in different ways, but I don't know how you reconcile that. To me, that's that's just huge, and that's a decision that you're faced with when you're young, but throughout your life. When is it my fight and when is it not?
Anybody want to respond or have an additional comment? Yes, Eileen.
Having taught junior high age group,
Mhm.
they don't stop to think, I'm an innocent bystander, I should stay back. They march right in. We as adults, as I find, we weigh all the situations, or as many as we can in that split second or whatever, when we have to make those decisions. And I watch a lot of, I don't know why, but a lot of crime kind of shows, and they immediately, you're not an innocent bystander. If you're an innocent bystander, but you're still obligated to report. And
Mhm.
you know, we don't have that innocence that we had as a child and just
Mhm.
jump in.
Mhm.
Cindy, and then Barbara, and then Anne.
So I see what you're saying, Nancy, and I think it sort of want to bring in what Eileen said as well, that I think maybe what Rabbi Held is talking about is not an absolute.
Mhm.
That we in fact are required to be thinking humans and to use the good judgment that we have. You know, to see some sort of injustice and just turn away, I think he would say that's, you know, that you're obligated to not turn away. Now, what and how you choose to do to engage requires your judgment, requires you balancing your safety with all kinds of things. It doesn't really excuse you sometimes, but maybe explains your actions. But if, you know, thinking in terms of familial kind of things, it's, again, it's a judgment. If I see, say, somebody in my family who is parenting perhaps in a way, you know, has made a choice that I wouldn't agree with, I don't know that righteous indignation is the correct response. I can express my opinion kindly and gently. But then again, that requires something different than if you see, like, say, physical or verbal abuse in your family, to not speak up. In that case, perhaps requires, you know, a bit more action. So I think,
it does.
you know, that I think that there's a judgment and there's a level of engagement, and that level of engagement can change over time.
Say, Barbara?
I'm reminded by this discussion of a part of the introductory video to the Temple Bethel civil rights experience. People who are smiling know exactly what line I'm going for, because it comes from Suzanne Bierman. And in the video, we're talking the early 1960s, and she's a college freshman or sophomore at Samford. I don't remember exactly which year she is. And she's talking about how she would like people in her class to be dealing with the issue. And she says, we must all at some point deal with things that make us uncomfortable. And I think that that's a very wise statement about, and it incorporates everything that Nancy, Eileen, and Cindy just said, that it makes us uncomfortable, but we can't just step away from it. We need to behave correctly. So, thank you, Suzanne, for being part of class today.
Anne?
I think of the three categories, familial is the most difficult, because on a personal level, I once intervened in a family situation and I later regretted it. I was totally I was right, but I was wrong, if that makes any sense. And so years later, I had the opportunity to say how sorry I was. And that was the only good thing of the whole thing. But I think when it's family, depending on what the situation is, it can be extremely difficult to make things right. So that's it.
That's interesting. I hear what you're saying, and at the same time, I also see where the rabbis would make the opposite statement. Because with a family member, you have the best possibility of actually making a change. Because you have a relationship, because you know each other, you have the possibility built into that relationship of helping somebody change and make things better. When you start doing a community, you know, I have a better chance of changing someone in my, you know, the three other people in my family than I do in the city of Birmingham. And I have a better shot at making changes in the city of Birmingham than I do throughout the world. Um, so I think that's the way the rabbis are seeing it. But when it doesn't go well, you're right. Like the risks and the stakes are higher when you are dealing with someone with whom you have a built-in relationship. If I try to change the entire world and I fail, I tried. But I try to change my siblings and I fail, then that can cause a lot of friction and relational damage. Margaret?
I think you pretty much said what I was going to say, which is that
my apologies.
Yeah, that there's an awful lot of danger inherent in interventions in the family, and also there are lots of ways in which, like, your children don't want to hear what you say at a certain point, and so on. So I'm not entirely convinced that the family is easier than a community. The other thing that I wanted to say about this chapter is that I really, really liked how he took so many parts from the Torah, from other writings and the Talmud and so on, and brought those in and used them to illuminate the points that he was making. I thought it was an especially rich chapter in that regard.
He definitely did bring a lot of textual evidence and support for his argument, yes.
So,
yes, Diane.
So, in recent years, there's been a very popular saying coined, and I think it may have come from another faith, but you've seen those little taglines that say, "Be the change that you want to see in the world." That's what this chapter reminded me of. So, um, when you work on expressing your indignation, it doesn't have to be in a combative way. It can be by the example that you set, by the things that you do, how you spend your time, and what you engage with. That's also working for a change without being combative. I don't believe combative works in any of the situations, unless a life is threatened or something. But so I guess I'm a little bit outside of the realm that everyone else is talking about.
I mean, I don't think Rabbi Held is talking about being combative. I think he's talking about not being ambivalent.
Okay. That's what I took.
And there's lots of ways to not be ambivalent without you can not be ambivalent and not be combative.
Yeah, right.
Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that really struck me towards the end of the chapter that I guess is a little bit of a criticism of Rabbi Held is that he gets into the idea that anger can be dangerous. That's on page 73, and that it can lead to like an overreaction. It can be corrosive. It can be punitive. There's all excesses of anger are bad. And so he talks about, I think, responsible anger. But I don't think he really sets any like guidelines for, or I don't know. I don't think he sets enough guidelines for responsible anger, because I think that's really important, because like, especially as we've been talking about within families, that anger could be really destructive.
No, he doesn't put up a lot of guidelines, and I wonder to some extent how much he really could, because I'm not sure it's a I'm not sure it's a one size fits all guideline that would work for everyone. What he does say is responsible anger requires a high degree of emotional maturity and self control, and that it needs to be balanced. Like your anger needs to be balanced with love, laughter, and kindness also.
Yeah.
That and in some sense, maybe that it's less a guideline and more of a self check. Is is our actions the when we're acting out of anger, are can you self check yourself of why and how you are responding? Um, the example he brings about Dinah and Shechem in Genesis 34 is kind of interesting. He seems to be reading it in a particular way, which is that um, Dinah's rape is more of a negative reflection on themselves, and that's why they're angry. And that's why Shimon and Levi go and slaughter the city. Not because of not because they are outraged at what happened to their sister, but outraged because of how what happened to their sister reflects on them. And that might be part of the balance is, are you acting out of love for another person, or are you acting out of your own self pain, I guess, your own feeling of self hurt.
Right.
But
I tried to think about that. Like if you're always acting out of love, would that temper you? But then I'm thinking like there's people who love God, but they do terrible things. They do terrible, angry things for the love of God.
yes, and so that's why I think what you said earlier I agree with is that um, to quote Star Wars, there needs to be a balance in the Force. You if you're always acting out of love and you're only seeing the good things in the world and you're only seeing the beauty and the wonderfulness and how everything is fantastic, then you're missing the really deep pain and suffering that some people are experiencing in the world at any given time. And going back into what Nancy and Diane and others are wrestling with, which we'll get to also. Um, you you're turning a blind eye to the problems and you have the possibility to make a difference and choosing not to do it. On the flip side, if you only act out of anger, as he mentions, it's dangerous, but he talks about on 75 that if the entirety of our relationship with God is about outcry and lament, we will end up experiencing God as cruel or abusive. Um, that if you only see the world as awful and terrible, um, and if you only see the pain in the world, then you're going to kind of give up on the idea of love altogether, because you'll only see God as the cause of all this, and what kind of God would love us and still cause all of this. I think what Rabbi Held's trying to argue is you need a little bit of a balance between them to be able to say there are good things in the world and there are really awful things in the world, and the really awful things I'm going to try to balance because I love this world and I love it so much that I don't want to see it be this way. That I love other people and I don't want other people to have to suffer this way. And, I think what he's arguing for is a protest out of love, not a protest out of outrage. Barbara, I thought your hand was up before too.
It was, but you finally got to my point, Rabbi. That you can't
I'm a rabbi. It takes me a while to get to
that you can't do it in an uninformed way. And so, you use the word balance, but that requires you to know both sides. And so I was thinking in terms of education, don't be ambivalent, but on the other hand, don't react without knowing the full story. So you got to it. Good enough. They pay you to do this, not me.
Look, I didn't get to the part about education, but you're right too, in that you want to protest something, that's fine, but do your research to understand what the situation actually is before you start diving into protest. Otherwise, you end up missing the point. You can point to a whole bunch of issues on which this is the case, but you end up missing significant chunks of the point if you just dive into protest because you don't like what's going on without actually understanding the full range of problem and why the problem is the way the problem is. And many of the deep problems in the world, as I often say, are really complicated by a lot of factors. And if there were simple solutions, we'd have been doing them, and then we wouldn't be having this problem anymore. We don't have a solution because it's a complex problem, and we don't just have an easy way to dive into it to just fix it quickly. But what I do appreciate about this chapter, and one of the things is that oftentimes we talk about love or loving God or God's love and being like, well, God loves us, so we'll just what's the song? Let God take the steering wheel. There's a song, I can't remember the full name. It's something about that. But I think what Rabbi Held is trying to push is the exact opposite. Is that if we love God, then we should be pushing for this world to be a reflection of the way that we love God. And that we should be pushing to always be making this world a better place. Because we recognize it's not right now. And part of our love of God is to speak up in protest because we recognize that the world is not the way God wants it to be. But you can't only be doing protest. I quoted before on 75, but he also says at the bottom of 74 that to protest against injustice without also expressing gratitude for the gifts of life and consciousness and Torah is to develop a religion that is all anger and indignation. To be all anger and indignation, apparently I can't say that word today, is to lose the capacity for softness and humor and the simple delights of daily living. And people who are always protesting can forget how to listen. There's a great song lyric that I think of a lot is it's hard to listen while you preach.
Yeah.
It's a good quote. That if you're always protesting, you forget to actually listen. And he says when it's time to move from protest to policy, the eagerness to listen is critically important. Protest is a good way to bring the issue to the table and say this needs to be addressed. Once the people are saying, you're right, let's address it, now you have to switch to policy, and that's a very different approach to creating policy than it is to creating protest. And then you have to listen and work with other people to get the problem resolved through policy to fix whatever the issue is that you're trying to get addressed. Margaret?
So we have talked a lot about so far about fixing things in the world. There are two things in this chapter that I think are a little bit different and are of interest to me. One of it is his interpretation of the Akeda, which am I saying that right? Which from the standpoint of what I know about ancient religions of places that are probably may have been contemporaries of the area he's talking about. There certainly was lots of examples of child sacrifice, but I hadn't heard that described here with regard to Abraham and Isaac. The second one is that we haven't talked. He talks about anger at God. So we've talked a lot about being angry with people or with situations of oppression and so on and so forth. But one of the things that to me is most interesting about Judaism is the permission and maybe obligation to argue with God.
Yeah, somewhere in my notes on the chapter in the margin, I kind of put in a note to remind me, like the old quote that the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is apathy.
It's what? I didn't hear.
Apathy.
That's what I thought you said.
So, it's not that love and hate are opposites. They're just two poles of the same emotion, but that apathy, like love is that you care. Apathy is I don't care at all. And so, if you love God, it's okay to be angry with God sometimes about what is going on in the world and what is going on in your life. God can take your anger. It's okay. You're allowed to be angry with God. And I really liked his lengthy conversation about the Psalms and how so many of the Psalms are expressions of anger or protest or disappointment or hurt or lament. That we think of Psalms as like huge and uplifting. They're really not always. A lot of times they're not. And the Psalms express the full wide range of human emotion, which is part of what makes them enduring, why we're reading them thousands of years later, because they're still relatable. But yes, many of the texts keep coming in to say, it's okay to argue with God. It's okay to negotiate with God. It's okay to protest at God. It's okay to yell at God. And that is kind of core to the Jewish tradition of, yeah, that's part of the job, is recognizing the world is not the way it is and being partners with God in changing that. Cindy, I saw your hand first.
Okay, so if we can be angry at God, does that not presuppose that we think that God had some control over the situation that we're in? I mean, because I don't think that we're supposed to believe in a God that controls things here on earth. So, like, what good does anger at God do if God can't do anything about it and God didn't cause what happened?
Um, because sometimes I get angry and frustrated about something, and I'll just call my wife and say, here's what's going on. Like, this is so frustrating and so annoying. And she'll say, well, why don't you do this? Or have you tried this? Or, what about doing this? And sometimes it's just in that conversation. She's not part of she's not part of the issue. She's she doesn't have any control. She didn't cause it. She's not. But sometimes sometimes you can do that. Um, so I think that's part of it. Um, the other thing I was thinking is there's a wonderful quote from Rabbi Gerald Wolpe, who was a longtime rabbi at a large synagogue in Philadelphia, where he said, I looked at all the problems in the world, and I looked at all of the injustice and the pain and the suffering, and I cried out to God, God, why don't you do something about it? And God responds, I did do something. I sent you. No, I don't think, and I don't think Rabbi Held thinks that God is, sitting there pulling the strings on everything in the world and causing everything to happen. Most of you studied Rabbi Artson with me enough to know that I don't really believe that either. But that protesting still can give us a sense of, well, now that I know this is a problem, what do I do about it? How do I make this better? How do I change it? And, protesting against God, who created this world and is invested in this world and wants to see this world, that's fine. And then God said, great, now what do we do about it together?
So basically, I'm in the same place that I was another time where, like, I have to believe in that one must believe that God somehow guides you in the right direction. I guess which I still have a hard time with that, but I guess I'm still stuck in the same place. Okay, thank you.
Barbara?
My question is also kind of philosophical. He talks about protest as a manifestation of faith back on page 68. This is right after he's talking about Psalms. And the last line of the first paragraph in that section is, it's vital that we grasp an important point. Being honest with God, even when life hurts, is not a rebellion against faith, but a manifestation of faith. I wish you could talk a little bit more and help me understand how it manifests faith, the connection to faith.
I think the way that he is thinking about it is often we think about faith as related to the positive things in life. And that, as he says, some spiritualized ideal of life. I think what he's trying, and that I think there is some sense emotionally that when something bad happens to us, when we're hurt, and that protesting against God for those things that happen to us is a rejection of faith, and a rebellion against faith. So often, what's the response, when you say, why would God let that happen to me? The response is,
He doesn't control.
well, I think if you ask the general population, they're not going to say God doesn't have control. I think they're going to say God has his ways. God will make it okay.
Has a
God will,
plan.
there's a mystery to God that we don't understand. But just have faith, and have faith that it'll be okay. I think that's a little bit what Rabbi Held, pun intended, is protesting about, or protesting against. He's saying faith isn't just about hoping for the good things in life. Again, faith means that you still love God even when things are bad, and that you maintain relationship with God even when things are bad, even when you're hurt, and that faith has to have room for both the good things and the gratitude, and also has to have room for the bad things and the anguish that is inevitable in life. Saying I'm not going to turn to God in the bad times is a rejection of faith. Or I'm only going to turn to God, or as another song lyric, full of song lyrics today, I only talk to God when someone's about to die. That's not a strong faith either. And I think what he's trying to argue for is that faith is about holding both like the full experience of life together, and saying yes, there's absolute gorgeous beauty in the world, and yes, there's also awful, terrible things happening. Yes, I am grateful for all that I have, and I'm really hurt by these things that happened. And I think his example of Job it's an interesting twist on Job that I haven't really heard before, but I find it kind of fascinating. That the problem with Job's friends is not what they're saying, it's that they're trying to use as he says, they're using dogma to silence pain. They're just trying to tell Job, just accept the credences just accept the faith, just have faith, just believe, that's fine. And Job is saying, no, I don't have to. I don't have to accept the faith credence. Look at what just happened to me. I just lost all 10 of my children and my wife and my house and all my property. Actually, I think his wife, but you get the idea. Like, I just lost so much. I'm allowed to be angry at God, thank you very much. And God's response is, God says, Job is the one who has spoken truth about me. That it's not those who are spouting creed who are telling the truth, it's the one who is wrestling with the good and the bad in life, that's the one that is telling the truth. Yes, Margaret.
It occurs to me to think of this as faith. When you say faith, it's almost like sort of some kind of blind belief. But just picking the word a little bit to say faithful is easier for me, because what it says is that you're staying in the relationship.
Yes, faith is part of, you are faithful if you're staying in the relationship. You have faith if you are staying in the relationship. I'm also thinking a little bit of the story he tells about himself when he was a student in, I'm guessing, early middle school, when his father died. And saying, what happens when you hear something so bad and so painful you can't bring yourself to say, blessed is the true judge? And the response is, for a true believer, that is not a question. And he says, like, that hurt. And that was, like Job's friends, that was using creed to try to silence the pain that he was feeling. And in his, at least in his argument, he's expressing the feeling of Job. I can protest if I want to. I don't need to say that if I don't want to. I'm in too much pain to say it, and frankly, I'm not going to. Make me. And I think at some level, God, he's believing that God says, "Okay, I hear you. You're in pain. That's okay. Let's work together." A sign of true faith is, "Okay, let's work together on that now." Now we've acknowledged it. Now we've spoken it. But when you try to bury it, you and try to sweep it away, that's not faith. Faith is being willing and able to say, "I love you, God, and this still really hurts." Or, "I love you, God, and I'm really grateful for all that you've given me." Both are valid. And I think finding that balance between them is part of what Rabbi Held is trying to argue for. Diane, did you have something?
Yeah, no, I was going to bring up the subject of what happened to him when his father died and ask you, tell me please that rabbis don't talk that way to kids anymore when they suffer a terrible tragedy.
I would like to think I don't.
Mhm.
I don't speak for all rabbis, so I am sure there are rabbis who are still saying that. I strive not to be one of them.
Well, I wondered how much of an effect that had on his career choices, decisions that he that he made throughout his life, that maybe it hurt so much that he needed to find a way to teach other people how to talk and work through the terrible dilemmas that they face.
You would have to ask him.
Yeah.
Clearly, it had enough of an effect on him that he had to incorporate it into his book. Um, I will say, for those who don't know him or don't follow him, this chapter is also interesting in that, if you don't know, Rabbi Held does suffer from a chronic illness that leaves him often in significant pain and significant exhaustion. So but being able to say, like, this stinks, this is awful, and I have the right to say that. And in fact, God has given me the permission to say that. Often, sometimes God even asks for us to protest for God. Um, that's fair, but also still finding a way to balance that anger and frustration with a sense of gratitude for the gifts that he does have, of still being able to read, still being able to learn, still being able to write a book, still being able to spend time with his family. That's a little bit where I think he's struggling with also. Nancy?
One of the things that I was thinking too, and in being, I don't know if brave is the word or maybe stupid is the word, enough to say to God, "I'm really mad about this. I don't believe that you're in charge of everything. If you were, then why in the world would this, that, or the other be going on?" But being your authentic self with God is really hard and really scary. And it's not that, I think that God knows our hearts whether we admit it or not. But to say to God, you really messed up. I don't know what you were thinking when you did this, but it was dumb. And that's irreverent at best. And in my little Protestant background, I was taught that is just a no-no. But the rabbi he says it's okay to say those things to God. Well, and I believe, first of all, God already knows you think that, whether you've spoken it or not.
Mhm.
But to say to God sometimes, I just don't feel very religious, and I'm not sure I'm into all of this, and could you just leave me alone? That's hard.
Yeah. And I think that's a little bit what he's trying to argue for is I think he recognizes that even in the Jewish community, we we kind of have that same approach of you really shouldn't say bad things about God. You really shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
protest against God. You really should just accept whatever comes at you, and whatever happens is God's will, and so your job is to accept it and live with it and
Mm-hmm.
just move forward because that's what God wants you to do. There is a strain in Judaism that believes that too, and I think that's part of what he's arguing against, to say that's not really what even the tradition tells us. The tradition, Abraham was specifically asked to, like, challenged to protest God. Moses protests, like, first thing Moses does, that we really see Moses do, is protest against injustice. Um, the Psalms go through all this protest against injustice. Like, God has more than given us permission to do this. So we should be working this into our faith. Similarly to how, we've, as a Jewish community, we've sometimes lost the idea of grace, and he's trying to argue to reincorporate that into our vocabulary. He's trying to argue to reintegrate protest and anger is a valid form of spiritual, as a spiritual tool to increase our faith. TK, and then I do want to get back to the thing about the no innocent bystanders before we wrap up. But TK, did you have something to add?
Yeah, he made the avocado pit too big.
I will let you take that up with Hashem, and you can protest that to Hashem however you would like.
That's all I got to say.
Okay. Barbara?
I just wanted to say that I love how this chapter on protest brings us back to our previous study. It is go ahead, wrestle with God. And I love the idea of wrestling over our issues, all of them.
Beautiful. I do want to come back to this idea of the bystanders on page 58 and 59. Because a few of you said you were struggling with it, and so I wanted to make sure we talk about it, but at the same, living a life of faith means you can't turn away from the bad things in life. I think that's part of what he's trying to argue. And you can't just ignore them and hope they go away. And as he says, following Abraham's example, we're asked to argue with God. How much more so are we called up in the face of injustice? And he says, it's easy to swim with the tide, to go along, to get along. It's almost always easier to keep quiet. But the Talmud also has another line that relates to this that says that silence is consent. So, following that same theory, if you see the injustice and don't say or do anything about it, then you're consenting, you're agreeing with it, and that's part of why you're tied in as an innocent bystander. And that's part of why they're calling you guilty, not innocent bystander, sorry, but that's part of why you're guilty for, or you're held responsible for the transgressions, because you're consenting to it by refusing to say anything. Now, that being said, I do want to put in a disclaimer of we only have so many hours and so much time in the world, and and there are so many problems in the world. I'm not sure we could dedicate. If we tried to protest every single one all the time, we like wouldn't eat or sleep or anything along the way. Um, so focusing in on one or two or three problems and taking those on and saying, I really feel strongly about these and I want to make a difference. That doesn't necessarily make you holding a transgression against all the other problems in the world. It means you're doing the best you can with what you have, and that's okay too. But that, I think, being so overwhelmed by the problems that you do nothing is part of what this text is trying to argue against. Or saying it's too hard and I'm not going to bother. That's not what that's against what this is trying to say. But recognizing you can't fix everything all at once, that's a different issue, and I just want to kind of raise that because I do know people who try to fix everything all at once, and it's kind of, well, you're not actually going to you're not going to make as much of a change spreading yourself across all of it as you would trying to do focus in on one or two, and then moving on to the next thing when you're ready to move on to the next thing. Cindy?
Just really quickly, I want to paraphrase Rabbi T.K. Thorne and what she said back to the civil rights experience. For those of you who haven't seen it, T.K. is one of the stars of our film, and T.K. said something like, and you can correct me, I don't want to misquote you, that it doesn't matter how big a thing or how small a thing that you do, but it's important to do something. Right? Is that, were you on mute? So, yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I think she said like a little something or a lot of something.
I have no idea what I said.
Go back and watch the video. You were really good.
I've seen it, and I thought, oh, okay, that came out okay. Thank you.
Yes, do something to make the world better, and get angry. Find the thing that gets you the angriest, and try to work on that. And then when you've made enough progress, you can move on to another thing. But don't get absorbed or consumed by your anger either. Find a balance and recognize that I have used, and I like the midrash he brought in about Abraham at the beginning of the chapter about the palace that is, the key word is doleket, and how you understand that. And does it mean that the palace is full of light or the palace is on fire? Either way, I think the answer is it's kind of both. Right? Like, on one hand, I think it's okay to look at it both ways. That on one hand, this is a gorgeous, beautiful world, and we should be grateful for it and for the gift of life that we have. And we should appreciate the beauty and the light and the love and all that is within, that we have access to in this world. And we should recognize that the world is on fire, and that there is a lot of pain and suffering and anguish in the world, and we shouldn't stand by and ignore it because of all the beauty. So finding that path of both, of it being, as Lisa said at the beginning, holding both things at the same time, of there's a lot of things to be grateful for and a lot of things to be angry at, and we can be both. And let our gratitude inform our anger, and make sure we're acting out of a place of love and relationship and compassion, and let our anger inform our gratitude, and let us not become complacent because of the good things that we have.
Amen.
Amen. That's right.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions before we wrap up for today? So, as I said in my email, we will not meet next week. So have some time for gratitude and Thanksgiving next week for the holiday. And then in 2 weeks, we'll begin part 2, which is going to talk about the different spheres of love that we are supposed to hold. And who are we supposed to love when we say that we're supposed to be loving. So we'll explore that a little more in 2 weeks. What is that? December 4th?
December 4th, yeah.
So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Have a good, peaceful, restful Shabbat. Happy Thanksgiving if I don't see y'all before then.
Safe travels.
Safe travels and Siyat Tova if you're traveling somewhere. And look forward to learning again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Bye.
Same to you.